Welcome back. I want to talk a little bit about the use of sound in your scenes. In this week's unit, we are working with sounds, and I thought the best one for me to show you an example of it would be this scene with the fire that we created using particles. If I go in to play the game or to play the level, it looks pretty good, but it's lacking something. And that's something that it's lacking is sound. There's no sound at all. And I run around this environment, and we all know that there are such things as ambient sounds in our life. We don't maybe pay attention to them, but there are car sounds in the background, birds, maybe a plane flying overhead, maybe an air conditioning unit kicking on somewhere. In the case of dealing with something right now, there's somebody outside rolling a trash can out to the street so the trash men can pick it up. Those kinds of sounds that occur in the background all the time is what makes our life seem like it's alive. And like I said, we don't pay attention to a lot of that stuff. So when we have to actually create an environment where we have to make it seem as realistic as possible, we often forget that that's something that we have to add into the scene. Now, it's fairly obvious that that fire right there should have a crackling fire sound to it. And maybe not birds or maybe not rain. There's no rain going on in here, but the technique would apply to that as well. That I need to have at least some sort of a sound effect going on in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a basic sound that is in the game. There is a folder of sounds that are in there that you can pick up and use. One of them is a fire. And we're going to talk about what a basic audio file is. We're going to talk about a sound cue, and then how a sound cue can be used to make adjustments to the fire, so the fire sounds so it sounds as realistic as possible, and how we can go make changes to things. Now, files that you want to import in as sounds, escape out of that. The files that you need to import in. If you want to bring in a sound file of your own, let's say you have a custom gunfire or explosion or something like that you've searched for on the internet and found and really liked, you have to remember that files have to be WAV. They've got to be .wav files. That's the only thing that Unreal will bring in. So if you're going to get involved with sounds, and I really recommend that you do, you're probably going to want to get yourself a pretty good little sound editor. There are some that are out there that are free. They may place limitations on what you're doing. I have one down here. Let me click on it and I'll bring it up. It's called FreeAC, and you can support it if you want or not. In this particular case, I've already supported it, so I don't have to worry about that much. But I think you send them, like $5 or $2 or something like that, and you've got it. And it'll convert and do a variety of things. You can go into the general settings, and you can click on a whole list of things that you can export out as, or it'll import all of these as well. So a lot of times you're going to find sounds out there. They're going to be FLAC, or they're going to be OGG sounds, or they're going to be MP3 if you want to bring in background music and you got it off of your audio player or off your phone. It's going to be an MP3 file. You need to run it through a converter so it's kicked out as a WAV file. If you're a subscriber to Adobe, Adobe has an audio program that you can use as part if you have a CS package or if you have a CC license. You can use that program if you've got it. So assuming you have a WAV file, all you need to do is just import it in like you would any other file. Now, when you bring it in, they're going to look like this. They're going to look like these black things that you see right here. Like here's a fire, and I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to go up to play, and I'm assuming that you can hear that, and it's the sound of a crackling fire. And I'm not quite sure how long it is. I can look at the properties and see, but it is of a set length, and it'll play, and then it'll stop. If I want to kill that, I'm just going to go up here to stop. All right. Now you'll also see in here something called a fire cue. What is the difference between an audio file or a sound wave file, which is what this is, and a sound cue, which is what that is? A cue is, in essence, blueprint for audio. So if I like double click on this, it's going to pop up and it's going to give me a window that talks about the compression quality. It's going to say what this one does set. It is set to looping. It gives it a basic sound group, and there's really nothing in here that I can do to change the way that that audio file is working. This is just the basic information that tells me a little bit about how it works. It talks about if there's a subtitle in case you want to have, words across the screen that would say, like when you see the SAP on audio on a television, or subtitling, those types of things. You can do that. You can give it a sound group. You can adjust its volume and its pitch, which is going to be how high or how low the sound is. You can go in and set attenuation, which is how far the sound is going to carry. And right now that's set to none. So there's really not a whole lot of things that I can do to that particular sound effect. And this is kind of clunky and cumbersome to use. However, if you open up a sound cue, what you're going to see is something that looks a lot like Blueprint. You're going to have a window. You're going to have my wave file is attached to something called an output. And this output is what actually makes the sound, and I can come up here, I can play the cue, and it shows me just like Blueprint. I can see exactly what's happening, and that's going to be important here in a second. I'll show you. Or I can just click on something and play the node. And I'm not seeing that line, but it would play a particular node, which is what this one is. If I had another node in there, then I'd have to have a node selected to click the play node button. Now, so if I'm using this, let me go ahead and close that back out. If I'm doing this, what I would do is I could drag that fire sound out in through here and drop it in, and I'll lift that up a little bit. It doesn't really matter in this particular case where it is. I do need to place it so I can at least get back to it, and I'm going to put it somewhere near there. And now if I go into play, I have the sound of the fire, which sounds pretty good. One of the things you want to make sure that you're doing is you're creating an immersive experience for a player. So they expect to hear the sound effects, and so you kind of give it to them. Otherwise, it's a real boring, strange, creepy scene where you can't actually hear anything. But the problem with dealing with just a straight sound file like that is no matter where I go in my world, besides my phone making weird noises, wherever I go in the world, the sound is exactly the same. So my stereo speakers, the way that it's playing the sound is like directly in front of me. And I am standing way over here, and I can hear that fire just as if I was standing right there. You're getting no difference in the audio sound at all, the sound quality. So in that particular instance, that's probably not a real good solution. Now, I can do something in here. I can go in, and if I look at my details panel, I can actually change the way that sound is working. So over here, I have some attenuation. And if I open this up, I have a bunch of attenuation stuff. And remember, attenuation deals with fall off. So what I'd like to have this do is I'd like to be, if I'm standing in front of the fire, I want it to be louder. If I'm moving away from the fire, I would like it to have it be quieter. And if I get far enough away, I shouldn't be able to hear it much at all. The problem is everything is grayed out. So what I need to do first is I need to go in and click a button that says Override Attenuation. And when I do that, these little spheres, or big spheres in this particular case, are going to appear. All right, and you can see there's one that's way out there, and goes way up there, and comes all the way down to here. And what is happening, and at this point I think what I want to do is I want to make sure that this is probably in the middle of that fire, and I'm going to raise it up so I can at least grab that thing again if I need to. The attenuation, what's going to happen is anything inside of this inner ball in here, you're going to hear the sound at full volume. And then as you back away, the sound is going to taper off until you get to that outer sphere. And then anything outside of that sphere, you can't hear the sound at all. So I'd have to come way out here before I wouldn't be able to hear that fire. And my world is actually, I want to make sure that that's enclosed just a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in here, and I'm going to make some adjustments. First of all, I'm going to take my fall off distance here from 3,500. I'll take that down to about 1,000, and that brings it in considerably. Now if I'm outside of that thing, I'm not going to be able to hear that fire. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the inner, and I'll maybe take the inner down to about 250 and see how that does. I'm still going to be able to hear in here. I can still hear the sound. It's just that if I'm inside here, I can still hear it. It's just going to be at its full loudest when I actually get really close to it. Now, what you may have noticed is when I went in and I said change that from 400 down to 250, you notice they both moved. And that is because the fall off distance always remains the distance away from the radius. So if you've decided 1,000 units is the fall off you would like to have, as I change my radius, it will always maintain that 1,000 distance in terms of fall off. So I can come in and say, look, I want to make this, let's make that 600. I'm still going to have 1,000 units for my fall off. So don't freak out if they go, it's not working correctly, because if I'm changing one, it's changing the other. It should do that. And if you would like to change that, then you're going to have to go back and change the fall off distance separately. I'm going to go back and take that down to about 250 again. And let's go in and see what happens. So I'm standing relatively close to that thing. It gets louder if I get right up on top of it. And there's no sound there at all. And that works pretty good. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. I get this nice immersive feel. I feel like it's a real fire. At least I'm getting that crackling and that popping, and it's doing pretty much what I want it to do. Except I really would like to change that sound just a little bit. And I talked about how I can double click on this, and I can come in here, and I've got volume. If I feel that it's too loud at its center core in there, I can come in and turn that down. I can also come in here and change the pitch. And the pitch, again, is going to make it either a higher sound. It's going to make it sound like if it's faster, the pitch usually goes up. If it's slower, the pitch goes down. For example, I'll just say, let's make the pitch 0.5, and then we'll go back in and see what happens. You can hear the difference in the sound. That's actually a little bit better. It's a little bit too low and rumbly before. I was looking for a little bit more of a crisp crackling. And so by changing the pitch down to 0.5, that's what it does. If I go back and say, well, let's take that pitch and let's go the other way. Let's go up and make it 2. Now when I go back into it, it's a much different sound in this particular case. It's like it's slowing it down. It's more of a rumbling sound going on, which is really not what I wanted. I wanted it to go the other way. Let me put that back up to where that was. I'll set those both back to 1 and 1. All right, and you'll notice I've set attenuation out there manually, but it's still showing in here that I don't have any, so don't panic if you see that, because that's really where you can control that. And I can control the pitch out over here too. I've got some modulation controls, and I've got some various things like that. But if I really want to do something beyond that, if I really wanted to do something like maybe run other sounds as well in this thing, I really need something that gives me a little bit better control, and that's exactly what that cue does. Now the cue, if I come in here and play it, I get that original rumbling sound, which I didn't really want that much. So if I pull this thing away, and you notice if you click on it, it's set to looping. If I wanted it to play once, I would uncheck that, and it would only play once and do it, but I do want it to be looping. If I click on the output, I do have some basic settings that are in here in terms of the radius and the fall off, and you notice these are different than what I had set out there for the other one, and that's because that's kind of the way that works. This is a different being than that one is out there. If I go out here and delete that, well, let's go back and see if I can't click on it, because they're hard to get. Sometimes when you're doing stuff, let's delete that. Boom. All right. And I've got that sound going on. What I would like to do is I would like to change it. So I have the ability to right click and add in a whole lot of different things. For example, I can go in and add an attenuation. And if I add the attenuation, then I have very precise controls over where that sound is going to play. And I'll just wire those up like that. So I have that is going to play. I have attenuation. I can come back in here. I can override that, and I can do the same thing. I think I had 250, and I had 1000. So I'll put those back on top of that. And I'd like to basically change the speed of that thing. So I can go in here and I can right click and I can go down to modulator, and I'll wire that into this one and wire that one over to here. And now I have my modulator, and what I want to do here is I'd like to have it, every time I go in, I'd like it to have it be actually a random sound. I can set this up so it would be standard. If I said, here's what I want, I wanted the pitch set to 0.5, and I'll say 0.5. And so what it's going to do is it's going to play the pitch at the 0.5 setting that I liked on the other one. But I also have in here volume. And there might be times when you have, like maybe you've got footsteps and you would like to have each footstep sound slightly different. So you're using the same footstep, but normally when a player is walking, they have a dominant foot. Everybody has a dominant foot. And so that's going to be a little bit more of a louder sound, or a more pronounced sound than the lesser foot that you have. It might be right foot or left foot, depending on how on whether you're right-handed or left-handed. But you can actually use the same single footprint, and I can make it sound like it's a varied footprint just by going in and using a modulator on it. So every time it makes the sound, it's going to give me a slight difference in the pitch, and it's going to give me a slight difference in the volume, because I can put that random aspect into it. Okay, I'm going to leave the volume the way it is right there, but I can go in and change that. So now if I play this, I've got that crisper crackling sound going on. If I said, let's go in and set that to 1 and stopped it, what I get is, okay, if I'm doing it that way, I get that sound. Now it's different, 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 different. Every time I click this thing, I'm going to get a different pitch out of that. So I have all kinds of controls that I can add into this thing as I'm going, and they actually work a lot better. And I would really recommend that you don't use the sound files pretty much at all. I really don't go in and use the sound waves in there. Everything I do, I turn into a cue, because I just feel like I have more control over it. It's just one extra step. It's just simply right-click on a sound and make it a sound cue. And you'll have access to that. But you do have the ability to do all kinds of things. And when you look at the stuff that is in here, the concatenator will allow me to go in and do sounds, say, in an order. I can go up and say I want a certain sequence of sounds. I can do it that way. I have a continuous modulator, crossfade by distance. So what I can do is I can set up a sound cue in a world, and I can say, look, it's made up of 2 sounds. For example, you have a scene set up or a level set up that you're inside of a large, like warehouse complex, and there's a street with a lot of traffic on the other side of the fence. And yet, the further away from that traffic you get, the less you can hear it, and the more you can hear birds singing in the trees back in the distance, or you can blend from the traffic sound out near the street. As you move away from the street and move towards the building, it'll build up the sound of maybe machinery inside of the building. So I can do those kinds of things, and I can crossfade based off distance. I can do a delay. For example, one of the things that you might want to do is, if you had a fire scene like I have, but let's say you wanted a scene in a building. I'll close this down over here and look at these. What we have is we have fire cues. We have a couple of the sounds of building collapses. We have some smoke sounds. We have explosions that are in here. And what you can do is you can go out and track down maybe the sound of fire engines. And what you can do is, inside of one of these, you can bring in fire. You can bring in the collapse sound. You can bring in an explosion. You can bring in a second collapse and a second explosion, and then bring in the fire truck sounds. And you can string them all together in here using a mixer. And a mixer will allow you to add as many sounds as you want, and you can mix them all together, and you can do things like add a delay. So if I have a delay and I have, for example, I'll break this. If I have a delay on that sound, right now if I play it, nothing happens, okay? Because there's a delay. If I go in there and say, oh, I didn't have that wired up, that's why. Let me wire that back down there. If I go ahead and hit the button, it does it right away, okay? But if I come into my delay and I say, give me a 3-second delay, it waits 3 seconds and then it starts playing. So I can actually take sounds and string them out and have them play in a specific order at a specific time. Like I said, it's in the beginning. This is like Blueprint for sounds, and we can go in and we can do delays, and we've done delays in Blueprint. So things happen in a certain sequence, in a certain order, in a certain way, and I can go and add all of these things in here to be able to do the different things that I want to do. I can play random sounds. I can set it up so I have again, I have 5 or 6 footsteps, which is what we're going to be looking at, and I want them to play randomly. I can go in and set them up so they play either randomly from beginning to end, or they start out randomly. I can do an oscillator, so as you near a sound, which is kind of like the Doppler effect. The Doppler effect, and the closer you get to a sound, the higher pitch it is, and it recreates the Doppler effect. And the oscillator does the same thing. You can play and you can have the sound, like you can make a more robotic sound using oscillator. There is a mature setting in here. The mature setting is kind of a neat function. What you can do is you can go in and you can set up your the maturity level. And what you can do is you can actually create a game level that some of the characters swear, and you have audio sequences where the player is talking and he's swearing, and if the player isn't a certain age, let's say if you've set the age at 12, and you say anybody younger than 12, I don't want to hear the swearing, what you do is you set up a class called mature, and then you can specify in here an audio file to be played. If the player at the beginning checks off a box that says I'm old enough to play it, then it plays all the mature sounds. If it's not, then it plays the other sounds. So you can do quite a bit in here with these sound cues, and like I said, I have found over the years that it's just actually easier for me in the long run just to go in and set up something using this, even if I don't have anything else. Even if I don't really have an attenuation or a modulator, I'm always going to have an attenuation, but even if I don't have one in there, let's say there are some times when you don't need attenuation. If the sound is supposed to play everywhere all the time, like background music, you don't really want attenuation on that. But I always set up a sound cue because I always find that it's much easier. So I'm expecting that you would do the same thing on yours. So I've got that fire in here, and what I'll do is I'm just going to drag that fire cue out, and you'll see it comes in already set up. Louder, and it starts to fade away. And what you end up with is a much more realistic scene, because that's exactly what people are going to expect to hear when they go into something like this. And the immersive experience really can kill a scene. I add sound effects into everything that I do. Anytime that you're using, you want the player to do something, add sound effects to it. If it's a click, if you want them to simulate turning on the lights, you can set it up so at the stroke of a keystroke for like picking up the key that we did earlier in Blueprints, you can set up a sound to play at that particular point. And what we're going to do is we're going to show you another video on how we can go in there and start adding in those things in. We're going to go in and we're going to look at footsteps, and we're also going to go and look at some other aspects of how we can use Blueprint to actually bring a scene to life. But everything I do, everywhere I go, I always make sure I add sound effects to it, because it's that phrase, immersive experience. You always want to give the player the most immersive experience you can give them, and not give them the opportunity to think for a moment, hey, this isn't real. I want them to believe that they are in a real scene. They see the fire, they expect to hear the fire. If they don't, they're going to start noticing things like, the 3D fire is not that realistic. And I don't want them thinking about that. I want them to think in the back of their head they're going to see the flames, they're going to hear the sound, and that's what they're going to do. And then they're going to like look around and focus on the other things and know that there's that fire there, and it behaves like a real fire. If I walk away from it, I can't hear it. If I turn around and walk back towards it, the sound comes back in. So get used to using these things, and the next video will show you some other tips and tricks that you can use in dealing with sound effects.